Ocidental africana. Estamos aqui na Buda Beach, um dos hotéis mais emblemáticos desta ilha, uma ilha que praticamente, tal como todo o país, todos os anos passa-se a viver com um sol espetacular, sempre mais ou menos uns 25 graus, que é muito bom para fazer turismo. Mas nós estamos aqui para falar das nossas mulheres. A intenção desta apresentação é para falar da necessidade que as mulheres cabo-verdianas têm em termos de formação e também capacitação, que estão pensando no empoderamento delas e também na possibilidade de que se crie autonomia em termos de negócio e formação profissional. Então vamos apresentar as nossas mulheres, que vai dar cara a esta iniciativa.
Olá, boa tarde, sou Ana Santos, secretária da Frimark em Cabo Verde, onde estamos a tentar trazer vários cursos para as nossas mulheres que têm vários problemas a nível de formação. Com os cursos pretendemos dar uma boa formação às nossas mulheres cabo-verdianas, sobretudo com o problema que temos de mães solteiras. Vamos tentar trazer cursos onde conseguimos formar essas mulheres para ter uma posição no mercado de trabalho.
Olá, muito boa tarde, Homem Impact. Chamo-me Dirma Lima, sou professora do curso de corte e costura montado por Afirmac, onde irei formar mulheres que futuramente querem abrir micro ou pequenas empresas e também jovem adolescente. O curso de corte e costura abrangerá desde como usar uma máquina até fazer uma roupa. Não irei ensiná-las somente como costurar, mas também vou ensinar como alguns materiais de artesanato, como fazer uma bolsa de tecido, pequenas carteiras e também os implantes de decoração nas roupas. Estou muito entusiasmada para fazer o curso. O curso de corte e costura decorrerá trimestralmente durante um ano. E em cada trimestre irei formar 25 mulheres. Para mim será um prazer enorme fazer a formação e espero que repita anualmente, porque é uma grande oportunidade para as mulheres solteiras e também para os jovens adolescentes que não terminarem o ensino secundário. Muito obrigada.
Thanks to all our women entrepreneurs at Cape Verde, and right now we're gonna follow to this video, to this awesome panel that we have prepared today. There's gonna be about rethinking investment, which I think that is a topic that is very trendy right now, and also is going to affect many decisions that many investors and actually entrepreneurs are going to be taking in the near future. And for this panel, we have three awesome people that I really admire. So our moderator today is going to be Adi Abili, innovation consultant at Anheuser-Busch InBev. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. If not, Adi will tell me immediately. Tom Widom, executive coach and consultant. Thank you for being always a big support, Tom. And Suvi Namwayo, associate at Oceanic Partners. Suvi, it's truly a pleasure to have you also today here in this panel. See you guys later.
Thanks, Micah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Micah, and good job on the pronunciation there. So it's a pleasure to be on this panel and to be speaking to everyone today. So the panel that we're going to be talking about is as Micah says, rethinking investment. And of course, 2020 has been a wonderful year for us to rethink investment and really forced us to think about where capital is coming from, who's asking for capital, and really think about the trends and ideas that we're seeing in the market. So that's going to be the focus of the panel today. But of course, we'll start off with some introductions from everybody on the panel today. So pleasure to meet you all. My name is Adi Abili, and I am an innovation consultant. My background is very much in the early stage startup space, including venture capital. I live in San Francisco with my partner and my dog, so living the American dream. And I've been here for about 8 years, but again, my focus is really on early stage stuff. I'll hand it over to Tom for introductions too.
Thanks, Heidi. My name is Tom, and I'm, as Micah said, I'm a coach and advisor to founders of startups, typically founders or startups in the tech space. My background is working in tech, about 20 years now, so it's been a while. I work both for early stage startups right through Fortune 100 tech companies, and that's me.
Brilliant. And Subi?
Hi, my name is Subi Nambwayo. I'm originally from Uganda. I'm based in the Bay Area, San Francisco. I work for a late stage venture capital firm in Sausalito. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thank you both. Okay, so let's kick it off. I'm going to jump straight into it with the big question, really just on what has been happening this year in 2020. And I want to ask the question just very simply on how have you seen investment change just across 2020? So I'm talking about, you know, the impact of COVID that we've seen, and how has this shaped the investment opportunities that you've experienced, from both of you? So for Tom, looking at it from the point of view of early stage startups, and Subi, when you're talking about later stage venture capital. I'll hand it to Subi first.
Okay, so for us, I think in a general sense, I'll speak in a general sense in terms of investment, because of the uncertainty that COVID has brought. In the beginning, investors were slow to invest, but after we realized trends in 3 sectors, these are sectors that have been thriving in COVID, basically have been thriving in a pandemic. There's edtech, health tech, and fintech. At least we've seen that investors are more interested in these sectors because they are thriving in COVID, and they're a necessity. Education is a necessity. A lot of people have lost their jobs, and so they're going into re-educating themselves and trying to build themselves post-COVID. Health tech, of course, because right now with the scale of a pandemic, everybody is looking to the next advancement in health. How can we solve the problem of health? And then fintech, people still transact in a pandemic. And if there's no physical exchange of cash, the use of fintech has become very much more interesting to investors and to users. So those are the 3 trends that we've seen even in late stage. That's what investors are much more interested in at this time, something that can survive a pandemic.
But with that, you dispel the myth that there is a shortage in venture capital, because I know that's, you know, something that people have been saying. You know, this year you're not going to be able to get investment, but you firmly believe that investment opportunities still exist.
Yes, they definitely still exist. Investors are just much more cautious in the way they invest because of the uncertainty in the market, but the money is there.
Okay. And same question for you, Tom.
You know, some of what I've seen are things that have started before COVID, but you know, I'm seeing more people looking to start up companies who have more diverse backgrounds, and I'm seeing people who actually are placing social impact either as the primary focus of their startup or as a secondary focus of their startup, which is definitely something that is going to be necessary as we emerge from this into our post-COVID world. We don't know exactly what the world's going to look like post-COVID, but what we do know, or what most people believe, is that whenever there's big changes anywhere, that creates opportunities. So the hope is that these people who are interested in starting up companies do so, and that you know, the other side of what I've been seeing in the past year or so is that there's more diversity in terms of the sources of capital. And that's particularly relevant, I think, for people that are looking to launch a social impact type business. It's not just VCs that provide funding to these type of organizations. You've seen, you know, some nonprofits are getting involved, some foundations are getting involved, large companies that have incubators are getting involved, specialized groups of angels. So, you know, I think that as we kind of come out of this, in sectors that might not be as favorable by some of the investment community, there definitely is capital out there. You just have to think outside the box in terms of where you're going to go look for it, and be a little more creative in terms of how you approach it.
I think that's a really good point in terms of the diversity of capital, and something that I want to come back to a little bit later in the conversation. But picking up on something else that you said there, Tom, which is around seeing different sectors that might not have had investment before, and those trends. So, where, on your side, where you're dealing with entrepreneurs, where are you seeing the trends and what people are looking to, right? So investors have their investment thesis, and maybe some of that investment thesis has definitely changed during COVID. But on the other side, are you seeing entrepreneurs coming with different trends, of people that you're working with, that you're seeing in the market in light of everything that's happening in 2020? Does it match up?
The trend that I've been seeing, it's it's sample size of one, so you have to proceed with caution. But I'm definitely seeing more people who are looking to start a business that has some kind of positive social impact on their community or the world that we all live in, and that's refreshing. That's not something that I had been seeing previously, and my hope is that that's one of the things that will come out of COVID, is that we'll have people that actually see all these opportunities to make a difference, and there'll be no shortage of people who actually need help in the post-COVID world, especially given the wealth and income inequities that seem to be widening as a result of the pandemic, particularly among women. I think that the good thing is that I'm seeing more people actually who aren't just focused on building a business to make a lot of money. They're actually looking to build a business to actually make a difference.
And Subi, based off some of those statements that Tom just made, and I think that it's right on in terms of where we are in the world in general, wanting to do things that make a difference. Are you finding that investors have a similar sentiment, wanting to work with companies that really are making a difference, and almost having a little bit more responsibility towards this world, and where they want to put their money in, and what kinds of things they want to get involved in?
Yes, I mean, I completely agree. I think everybody has had time to ponder and reflect on what really matters in the world. And if I give you an example of the field of the sectors that are thriving in terms of investment, last year, edtech and health tech were not receiving this kind of attention. EdTech is doing something that's important in the world. Health tech is doing something that's important in the world, that's going to make an impact. So investors are gravitating towards that, not only because customers are there, but also because it's going to make an impact. At least for us in the late stage, we're seeing a lot of that.
And on the subject of impact, as this is the Women's Impact Summit, I have a similar question to get your thoughts around, coming back to Tom's earlier comments around the diversity of capital, the diversity of entrepreneurs.
Yes.
How are you finding the venture scene in terms of backing women, from your experience? And have to ask this question because, of course, we wouldn't be here without that question.
The venture scene in backing women, I still feel like we're still a bit behind, because women-led companies are not as backed as male-led companies. But right now, I think people are becoming more socially aware and trying their best to include women. There's funds that are specifically driving towards, investing in women founders, supporting them where they need support, and basically opening doors for them. I think the US election can show you an example of a door that has been opened. So a lot of investors are starting to open the doors for women so that they can come in and pitch and get the investment that they need, and encourage them to run sustainable businesses, not be afraid to ask for money and things like that. So we're still behind, but right now, with people being more socially aware, I think that we are slowly making traction and advocating for that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, here's to that for sure. And I mean, we've seen a rise in female entrepreneurs as well, right? Who also want to get backing, and Tom, from what you've seen in terms of this impact as well, are you finding that female entrepreneurs are more willing to come to the market? They have more of a desire, just the numbers are more. What has been your experience, or what have you seen in terms of this diversity in the market?
I think it's from what I've seen, it's slowly starting to change. I think there's still a whole lot of room for things to improve. But I think that there is a growing perception from what I've seen is that it's not viewed as being a male-only game. It's viewed as being a people game, and it doesn't really matter your gender. And the funds are out there. You might have to look harder, unfortunately, if you are a minority or if you are a woman. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. And I think that belief is what's fueling these more people kind of saying, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring, and I'm gonna actually try and make this happen.
Okay. Yes, a wonderful sentiment that we should all be thinking. And I want to kind of take this and shift the conversation a little bit to ask you both more around how this is translated to what we see in terms of where we can go. So you touched on it a little bit before, Tom, when we talked about capital and having options out there. But I also want to talk about this in terms of markets. And Subi, particularly interested to talk to you from your experience and things that you might have seen in other markets in other places in the world. But how do you think that, over the last couple of years, how have you seen the investment landscape change in terms of opening, in terms of markets, so geographically, where people can really go in terms of getting capital, and then where they should be getting that capital? What has been kind of your experience? And to be, again, from a later stage point of view, are you seeing these markets open up for people, and again, rethinking what investment really means? The argument of Silicon Valley as the mecca for investment has been under scrutiny for a little bit now. So interested to hear both your thoughts on this. I'll hand to Subi first.
I'll speak according to the African continent. In the past 3 years, we've seen every year that investment interest has been doubling in terms of percentage from the previous year. So right now we're just seeing a very high influx of investment interest in the African continent. There's different innovation hubs. There's a West African innovation hub. There's something in Northern Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern. So there's much more interest now, and I think you can see that companies have been investing Series A, Series B, Series C. Recently, a Nigerian company got acquired by Stripe. That's Paystack. So slowly but surely, we're seeing that the world is becoming much more interconnected. African entrepreneurial startups are also on the global run. They're pitching, looking for investors. Maybe 3 months ago, I was talking to an entrepreneur back home in Uganda, and he was telling me he spent the whole of last year talking to investors. His company is a health tech company that focuses on remote consultation. It's telehealth. It's a telehealth company, and he was able to raise money, but it took him a year to court his investors and finally raise a round. But he's raising around from investors from all over the world, not just the African continent. Of course, there's investors who are African-based, geographically based, and that's fine. But I think right now it's slowly changing, and something like telehealth right now in COVID, it's thriving. But when people look at them thriving, they think they've got the money from COVID. No, they started last year and then they got the money this year. So it has taken time and courtship to get this amount of money. And luckily COVID came when they've just raised a round and they're able to hire new people and, you know, support the demand that they're getting. So in terms of investment on a global landscape, I think that the boundaries, the geographical boundaries, are now becoming a myth because everybody wants a play in each part, whether it's Americans who want a play in Asia or Asians who are investing in America, Asians investing in Africa, Europeans investing in Asia or Africa. I think right now, globalization, we're starting to really see the effect of globalization in the investment world.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you bring up this point because it's something that I hear so often, you know, from entrepreneurs around, you know, that they want to raise in a certain market, so they feel they need to move to that market because that investors only invest in that one particular region. So it's good to hear from your point of view and things that you've seen around investment being much more globalized. And Tom, you know, off the back of that, do you find that entrepreneurs are having a similar view? So understanding that their products, for example, can be more global without them having to be global themselves in some senses.
Yeah, I think that the internet has definitely kind of changed the way that businesses operate. So in some ways it's arbitrary whether you establish your market as being in the U.S. or Africa or anywhere else in the world. You get to decide that. It's not necessarily always a physical constraint. So I do think that people are, some of the entrepreneurs that I've been working with are thinking that way, and it's influencing where they look for money. I mean, just because typically they would look to places like Silicon Valley or elsewhere in the U.S. That doesn't mean that's the only place where the money is going to come from, especially if the business that you're building easily ports into other regions of the world. And I think that's it's happening slowly, but it's a positive trend, I think.
And what advice would you give people who are looking for money, right? So to your point where you said it's influencing where people are looking, if you could give, 3 or 4 tips to people right now in the current investment landscape, what their options are, what opportunities are available, what would you say? And I'll start with Tom first.
So the hardest piece of advice that I ever give to any of the founders and entrepreneurs I'm working with is to be selective with respect to the capital that you're looking for. If you're a founder, especially if it's your first raise of money or it's an early raise of money, so much time and so much work goes into that. It happens slowly. That's probably going to be one of your more difficult raises. And there's this huge temptation to take, whatever money you can get. The problem that can create is if the people that are giving you capital don't care about the same things that you care about. And that's particularly important if your startup has a primary or secondary focus, which is on social impact. You don't want to get into a situation where you take the wrong money and you undermine your ability to deliver the impact that you hoped. And I think that one of the ways you can kind of do your best to try and prevent that from happening is look at where those sources of capital are currently being deployed by that, if it's a VC organization or what have you. What kind of companies are they investing in? And when you're talking to them, what things are they asking you, and what things are they responding to? Once you've signed the deal and you've got the money, it can be too late, and you don't want to set yourself up for a negative outcome.
Yeah, and Subi, see you're ready to talk.
Definitely agree with Tom. You definitely have to know who you're going into partnership with, and it's very important. So I won't repeat that point. I definitely agree with you. As an entrepreneur, you need to do that. Do your research and make sure that your ethos as an entrepreneur and the investor align. But what I would want to speak of is like in the different markets, let's say the emerging markets, there's a different kind of investment that I've heard of where it's kind of like a purchase order investment. So let's say you, from my country, Uganda, I'm from a land linked country. They like to say sometimes landlocked country. So we don't have direct access to the ocean. So we have to import a lot of our things. And as an entrepreneur, if you have a product, sometimes you don't have the capital to just make a fulfillment. To import those products, sell them in the market, you need maybe like $10,000 to do the import, but you don't have it as an entrepreneur. There's specific funds that are doing this, that are starting to do this slowly. They'll provide you with the money that you need to bring in that purchase order for as long as you can prove to them that you have customers who are willing to buy this. So you don't have to maybe take a loan from the bank, but you have this agreement with this investor that they'll do a purchase order investment per purchase order that you have. And then there's a payback arrangement. It's different from a bank, maybe less interest. And for VCs, it's a way to test and see, can this entrepreneur do this? If we invest in this purchase order, can we then later maybe invest in a round? That's just one example of how entrepreneurs can find capital. It doesn't always have to be in the big lump sum that you want. Sometimes it can start as a small test.
And I think, you know, to that point, you know, encouraging entrepreneurs to really do their homework on just options that are available to them. There's so many different opportunities that are available in terms of getting investment. That the idea of the traditional VC is definitely not at the top of everyone's list. But, you know, considering what they want geographically, etc., a lot of different factors can go into that decision. And there's a lot of literature that's on it at the moment, right? If you go even into Google and go down the rabbit hole, which we all do with Google, you can find a lot of information about what your options are. I do see that we have a question that has come through on the Zoom. We just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask this question that's coming in from Caroline. Then I have one final closing question. But the question coming in from Caroline is, what is your take on agri-tech with COVID-19 and mobility challenges? How do we empower women working in the local markets through digital technology? I'll ask that to Subi.
So how we empower women in the local market through digital technology. The thing is, at least, I don't know where you are, but your last name looks familiar. I don't know where Caroline is from. She's from Uganda. Oh, wow. I was right. Well, I would say right now in Uganda, the mobile penetration is big. So you can do that through text. Right now, a lot of people are on WhatsApp. If they're not on WhatsApp, they're available via text. So you can still promote like your product through text in terms of communication. Text, social media, people are on social media. There's Facebook Zero, people are always on there. So the mobility challenge in terms of lockdown and you're not allowed to move, you're going to have to adapt. What's happening in the world right now is there'll always be phases. So there's, let's say, phase 1 where you're completely locked down like we were in March, or everyone was in March. And then there's this phase now, which is between 4 and 5. We're open, but not open. So you have to learn how to function as a business in the four phases. Where you're completely closed, how are you going to function? How are you going to communicate? Where you're partially open, how are you going to communicate? How are you going to do business? If you are completely open, how are you going to operate? How are you going to do business while keeping the COVID guidelines in mind? So I would say you should have a strategy session with your business. Look at the 4 different scenarios of the phases that we're in. And whenever you're in that phase, you have to operate that way. That's what I would advise, because it's going to keep changing until we find a vaccine, and you'll be in and out of those different phases. Open, not open, closed, not closed, partially open. How do we operate in those and find a strategy for each of those? That's how I would say you can thrive in COVID.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer there. And it actually does lead in very nicely to the final question I have for you, and of course to ask for some closing comments. And the question is around the needs of the consumer, and really what we've seen in terms of and you answered a little bit there, Subi, with that, but what should entrepreneurs really be keeping in mind, in terms of what the consumer is demanding, especially during this period, and how we've seen the consumer adapt to this period. What should they be thinking about with their products and services? So not only how they operate under these 4 different stages, which is wonderful advice, but also how might their product actually need to completely change in this new light. And I'll throw that to Tom first.
I think that one of the things that unfortunately we're all going to have to learn during this time of COVID is how to be flexible and adaptable. The positive side of that is it kind of gives you a great opportunity to build that muscle and build that skill, which only serves you well as you move through your business. But you have to keep your eye on what's happening and be willing to pivot and be willing to respond based on what your customers are asking for and what your customers need. I think one of the things that's easy to lose sight of when you kind of are in the midst of starting up an enterprise is always go back to the core value proposition that you're delivering to your customer, because it's got to be real and it's got to be crisp, and it doesn't always stay the same. So that's something that I just can't emphasize enough is what value are you creating for your customers, and how do you make sure that stays that value proposition stays fresh and stays real as the markets and the world changes.
Amazing. Thank you. And then just any final comments, Subi, on that?
I would just like to add to it. Thomas talked about value, and maybe I'll take entrepreneurs back to what problem are you trying to solve? When you started the business, what problem were you trying to solve? COVID has come in, it has disorganized your business completely. What problem are you trying to solve now, with COVID also inclusive? And then you also need to talk to your customers. Talk to your customers, see what problems they're having. If they're not using your service anymore, what do they need that you feel like you can provide during these COVID times? Adaptability, as Tom said, is very key. You have to be able to pivot. If in March you are doing something else, in August you're doing something else, but you're still supporting your customers, even if it means you need to acquire new customers too. You have to keep evolving. If COVID has taught us anything, that's what it is. Make sure you're solving a business problem.
Amazing. So that is the end of our panel session. Subi, Tom, thank you so much. Wonderful comments, wonderful insight. And of course, to everybody on the line, thanks so much for joining us.